Hello and welcome to another Register Kettle, your chance to hear the news from the people that actually write it. And it's been a doozy for this week for San Francisco. The city has been full, its bars and hostelries have also been very full, and more of a few restaurants have been booked out because it's the RSA Conference in town. Even though it's nothing to do with RSA anymore, as they sold it to a private venture fund, but still. Now, Jessica, you're our person on the spot. You spoke at the show, you moderated a session as well. How was it compared to last year?
I did. It was definitely busier this year than last year. Still a big focus on AI this year, although I do feel that it was more practical. It wasn't quite as much theoretical. Here's all the horrible things that could happen with AI, worst case scenarios. But again, still really heavy AI focus. Also a lot of focus on Volt Typhoon and the threat coming from China.
Right. You've spoken to some people about that, haven't you?
I did. I heard from a lot of people about that. Spoke with some private researchers about that. Spoke with CISA about the threat from Volt Typhoon. And it was also the topic of several panels that came up heavily during one of my personal favorites always is NSA State of the Hack. That was a big topic during that panel, as far as, and other panels as well. So, but overall, good show. Back to pre-COVID levels, it seemed like, and lots of activity in San Francisco this week.
Okay, yes. Well, I mean, we've all been doing sort of video interviews around it. I spoke to Mikko Hyppinen just before his keynote. I'm kind of glad that you didn't get to that because it sounded really, really depressing, which is, traditional for the Finnish culture. But yeah, I mean, I spoke to him about it, and he's just 10 years on of corporate ransomware. The situation's getting worse. There's no tech fix out there. Basically buckle in, and if you can get yourself a good security job, then you're set for life. It's
what was his did he have anything positive to say? Because if you just tell people that, like, everything's terrible and you're going to get hacked and extorted, then what are you supposed to do with that information? I mean, it's like being told that you're
the world.
Well, it's like being told that, like, oh, nice house you have, but bear in mind the locks don't work, and also the windows can be opened, and the roof comes off. I mean, like, what was his advice to people, Iain?
Well, I talked to him about it, and he was saying that, while there is a slight focus by these criminal scum towards education, medical, and government, that's not specifically because of what those sectors do themselves. It's just that traditionally they tend to have the worst IT. I mean, if you think about a school zone, for example, it's probably got one, maybe two people running IT for the whole thing. The chances of them keeping up with patching and the rest of it are virtually nil. So it's easy pickings. Yeah, I mean, basically it was don't be the low-hanging fruit was his advice. I mean,
is that kind of like, you don't have to, if a bear is chasing you, you don't have to be the fastest person, just don't be the slowest.
Yes, exactly.
That unfortunately seems like a lot of cybersecurity advice lately, right? Like, I've done quite a few interviews with people recently as well, talking about, sort of critical infrastructure security and the state of all these things, right? And, like one person was telling me earlier this week, right? Like, even if you're not, a big entity with a big bullseye target on your back, right? Like, if you're a low-hanging fruit, they're going to hit you, not because you're important, but because you're a stepping stone on the way to someone bigger, right? Like, it's just every piece of advice right now seems to be like, oh yeah, this is happening. There's not too much we can do to stop it. So just don't be that low-hanging fruit.
Jen Easterly brought up in every single one of her talks that I heard, and she had CISA had a media roundtable with reporters. And going back to the Secure by Design pledge that was signed by 68 tech companies, again, we don't know if this will have any teeth or not. It's voluntary. But her point was, let's put this back on the manufacturers, not the end users like the hospitals and the cities, local governments who don't have a ton of money to hire more security staff. But if the manufacturers actually build products that are secure in the first place, then that's going to go a long way towards solving the problem.
Right. So okay.
There's one solution.
Yes, I mean, basically lock down your applications and your code. I mean, I know you're writing about this at the moment, just with the AWS CISO guy, but I mean, all of this stuff has to be locked down, and you're never going to catch it all. It's kind of like once the security industry started using the phrase advanced persistent threat, which basically translates to, we can't stop it, so good luck. I mean, you're always going to get past the human guard, it seems.
I wish it just wasn't so fatalistic, I just wish that... I guess there's just a lot of things to do. You have to, it would be nice if people wrote secure code. It would be nice if people patched vulnerabilities. It would be, but then you've also got the human factor where if you have your network set up so that people have access internally to your internal documentation, and files and all that kind of stuff, which I guess they should need, then you need to also think about stopping someone from being just tricked into just clicking the wrong link. I mean, you could have software which is really secure and there's no vulnerabilities. You could have a really great patching regime, but you still have to put up with people basically being emailed .zip, .exe files and then like double clicking on them.
Well,
so I wish there was a
sorry.
solution to it. I just wish there was a comprehensive solution to it, because it seems dumb that this still is going on, for me anyway.
And that's why people don't do good security, right? Just because there are so many, it just makes everything take a lot longer, and it makes it a lot more complicated. And so kind of that whole chicken and the egg problem.
I mean, is the answer to take the human out of the equation? I mean, you said there was a lot of AI stuff going on at the show, Jess. Was there anything which really you thought, well, maybe this could actually work, and it's not just throwing the latest buzzword at our old products?
I mean, definitely in terms of doing things like scanning for vulnerabilities, some of the red teaming activities that I spoke with people about, sounds like that can be really useful in helping people make sure that they have a more secure environment. Having the red team, hopefully AI will catch these before the people who are actually trying to hack into your systems are able to find them. So that I feel like that is one area where it can work. But aside from that, I mean, it's things like it can speed up the process. Obviously, it can take some of the humans out of the equation in terms of things like log management, scanning, and hopefully free them up to have more time to focus on the more difficult security issues. So those are some promising areas that I heard about this week.
Okay. And of course
implement them. I was just going to say, it depends on whether or not people use them, though. So it's always
there is that. One thing we did hear is the war on drugs is apparently going to be prosecuted by AI now. It's, I mean, it worked so well here. You've got weed shops all over San Francisco, and it's like, what war on drugs exactly? But I mean, they did raise a point that they're going to use everything in their arsenal when it comes to this sort of thing. I don't know. I mean, would you, if you got fingered by an AI, would you fight the case in court? What do you actually do with this? Because we can't examine the underlying algorithms that they're going to be using, surely.
Right. And then also just the question about that we've seen in terms of things where it's usually used surveillance. It'll be interesting to see if, especially law enforcement and government, is able to balance this, the privacy rights and the privacy potential implications and civil liberties with fighting whatever war happens to be at the moment. And if they can actually balance those two and do a good job of it, where they're not more targeting certain populations. So that remains to be seen as well.
Well, this is it.
There was quite a lot of. It seems like there's quite a lot of government focus. This year.
It seemed bigger to me than it has in previous years. There was a lot of government focus. I mean, even just the announcement of Lockbit's Up identity on Tuesday of the show, that took a lot of airtime. Just people talking about it, and it definitely did seem more heavily law enforcement than I've seen in previous years, which was interesting.
I mean, this is it. Just to explain for listeners, the feds actually released more details, including a really bad photograph of the chief administrator for Lockbit. I mean, seriously, the guy looked like he was roided out. But they teased us with this, and they put the ransomware. They mimicked the ransomware countdown. I mean, it's useful, I suppose, and it's nice that they've actually caught it and shut this one down. But it seems like whack-a-mole. I mean, you kill one, another one springs up, or another 5 spring up. And I don't know. I don't want to be overly depressive, but
is it that like the reason why there was lots of government focus this year because I mean, some people like to say that government spending is recession-proof. That the government will always buy things and spend stuff. Like, is it that there was not a lot of interest, not as much interest from the private sector side, and so therefore the public sector side was kind of more dominant at the show? Or was it the fact that governments are and public sector is starting to kind of take this whole thing very seriously in terms of regulating it and trying to drive through standards. I mean, it's interesting that CISA keeps pushing for secure code. What did you make of it? Like, did you think it's
I think it's more the latter. I think it's the recognition that government needs to play some role in it, whether it's either these voluntary agreements or regulation. The kind of the balance of that, especially in terms of AI, was also a pretty big topic. And also, I think the acknowledgement that these big threats like ransomware, nation state, that requires some government involvement. You definitely heard from all the private sector security folks saying, yeah, this is what we've been pushing. Again, scattered spider. We've seen one arrest in that group, I guess, but just the need for government to be more proactive and do more of these takedowns, hopefully to make it more expensive for these groups to operate and become more of a deterrent to them.
Right.
So that was my take on that.
Yeah.
Okay. Did what was your sense from the show? Did people appreciate having government stick their oar in? Or like, how did that come across?
No. If it means preventing the criminals from doing more bad things, such as hopefully the lockbit, that will help with that issue, but not with the threat of regulations. No, nobody wants that. A lot of people I spoke to spoke of how that will inherently stifle innovation, kind of the normal responses I think that you hear from tech companies when there is the threat of regulation looming. Definitely prefer the carrot over the stick in this.
This is it. You mentioned the signing up for the Safer Code Pledge, but it's entirely voluntary as to whether or not you actually do it.
I mean, come on. Right. I mean that whole thing of like, of Microsoft as well pledging, this time we'll write secure code. I mean, what? I mean, some of it was
memo.
Some of it, like one thing about RSA Conference versus things like Black Hat and DEF CON is that Black Hat and DEF CON, to me, seem to actually say like, okay, here's ways in which you break into people's systems, and RSA seems to be more along the lines of like, don't forget to have a strong password, and let's all pinky swear that we won't put any more bugs in our code.
Well, yes, I mean, DEF CON certainly is very, very much like that. Black Hat still is to an extent, although I was up there last year and it was just, somebody described it as, it's like RSA with hookers. But I mean, it's
okay.
I mean, I don't know. I thought there was some good advice at RSA, but I mean, as you're right, it was much more general. This is what you need to do. This is how we're going to get there. But,
there seemed to be a lot of wake-up calls. Like, that's one thing I noticed. The theme of this week was wake-up calls. It was like China, Russia, Iran breaking into critical infrastructure, water treatment centers. I'm trying to remember specifically what it was, but with all their kind of
water facilities.
It's just crazy to me that like you've got these foreign nations being caught with their hands in US critical infrastructure, and it gets described as a wake-up call. I mean, I would have described it as something a bit more serious than that. How serious?
We've done the same.
How serious was it? Like, from what you could tell?
I mean, it seems pretty serious. And from all accounts, it sounds like China will probably take some action toward Taiwan in the next 5 years. The U.S. presumably will offer some type of support. And then, like we've written on before, China's already in our critical infrastructure networks, whether those are the communications networks that can aid the military, whether those are our critical systems just that keep cities up and running, banks, everything else that people rely on just for normal day-to-day life, then there's a good chance that they will do something. And then what is that going to mean for any U.S. support to Taiwan? So it kind of, that definitely had a dire feeling. I mean, I think that from the government side of things, you do hear the more positive spin. We're prepared to combat this. We're working with critical infrastructure owners and operators, but it's impossible to know how many critical facilities have been compromised already. So
I mean, as an additional complication, the Pentagon has already said that an attack on the critical infrastructure would merit a physical response, which, in the case of China and Taiwan, is going to make things very interesting. But assuming that nuclear.
I was saying, God knows how many fingers we have in their digital pies as well, right? I think it's mutually assured digital destruction at this point. Probably.
I was about to say that this is the new MAD. It's a new mutually assured destruction. It's sort of like, nukes. I mean, let's not talk about that 50s and 60s technology. Let's talk about instead about how it's like, oh, well, if you invade Taiwan, I guess we'll have to shut down your grid. And it's like, well, if you shut down our grid, I guess we're going to shut down your schools. And it's like, well, shut down your schools. And I mean, I don't know. Is that preferable to war?
I don't know. I mean,
how do you feel about that?
I mean, you can do some devastating stuff if you mess with water supplies and things like.
Right.
Yeah,
there's potential for a lot of civilian casualty if governments go this route, I think, and that's the scary thing.
Water, power, telephony. It's like a city with no power for, say, a week is going to be a just desperate place. But on that cheery note,
well, I was going to say, but there's some ongoing conflicts around the world right now where probably the people involved may probably prefer it if this was all digital, like Ukraine. The whole Israel Hamas thing. I can imagine there people kind of like, do I want to have tanks and drones leveling my city, or should we just not have the internet for a few days? I mean, I don't want to be flippant about it, but I wonder how I think people might prefer to have more digital attacks in future. It just reminds me, wasn't there like a Star Trek, the original series episode about this, where they did away with war? They just had computers on each side that just calculated how many people
sounds
theoretically
like it should
would
be a
killed.
Star Trek episode. If it,
I think they would kill. I think wouldn't they like execute them or something like that if they your lottery number is up sort of this day or whatever or something. That sounds
it was like two computers talking to each other saying like, oh well, we fired a weapon at your city last night and that killed 2,000 people, so you have to execute 2,000 people and we'll execute like whatever it was. I mean, I'm not saying it's going to get. It just reminds me a little bit like that. The fact that we're all in each other's networks, just like a Mexican standoff.
Hopefully we will all live long and prosper. That's one of those things. Anyway, well, presuming the world hasn't turned into a smoking hole in the ground next week, we'll be back. But if you want the audio version of this, you can get this from your favourite podcast sites. And thank you very much for joining us.